Thank you. Maybe Willis, do you want to give your thoughts on all this?
Well, let me begin by congratulating the authors on tackling a very complex issue, beginning with trade preferences to the effects of food aid in developing countries. The issues are complex to the extent that, first of all, getting information about the variables being considered is very complex. And the first issue I want the authors to address is that particular issue of data availability, both in terms of preferences, especially when it comes to developing countries. We find that in the data set which were used for the preferences, there are a lot of zero values. And how to deal with those zero values, I think, is of interest, because it may mean that it's a decision of the players, the actors, not to get involved in production or in marketing or otherwise. So the first issue is dealing with large missing values, so to speak. The other issue is the implementation issues, especially with regard to the developing countries. We find that in our countries there are weak governments, and the communication channels, especially with the private sector, we are involved in trade matters, is very weak. We have lack of legal and economic expertise to handle the kinds of preference issues which are being addressed. Administrative structures are also weak, and limited and poorly trained manpower. Now, out of this, we find that the kinds of analysis which are being done may be grounded in data which are not really good enough, and therefore the results might not be consistent, so to speak. Well, that gives then leads to the question of how we can target technical assistance or trade preferences with regard to how best it can improve food and nutrition security in these areas. So without proper targeting, then we are going to be lost, because at best we can generalize, but in the end we need to have targeted kinds of interventions. Now the preference margin calculations, I've already said, depends very much on the data, and I think that needs to be relooked and be refined to give us good results. The paper on trade preferences asserted that they were dealing with assessing trade diversion rather than trade creation. I'm not sure why that was the case. I mean, if that can be highlighted, I think it would be good, because normally trade preferences have a coincidence. I mean, as a coincidence of impact. There is sometimes. I mean, there is both trade creation and trade diversion, and where you want only to assess one and leave out the other is something which is not very clear to me. Coming to the second paper, the case studies. I think they are very interesting case studies, and most of the results just confirm what we already in the public domain. We find that trade aid would make the producers not produce because they know aid is coming, while the quantities may not be affected. I think that is an expected result. I don't think it is very strange. The issue on trade is the fact that it creates dependency. That's also known. And to the extent that it also moves the producers from producing the foods they're already aware of, that dependency creates a situation that if aid doesn't come, then the foods which were there before are no longer there, and it will be more, it will reinforce the problem linked to food and nutrition security, especially for the poor farmers or poor households. So trade, although it's, trade is a driver for development, and it should take prominence over aid. Aid should be de-emphasized in matters to do with intervening in areas where food and nutrition security in developing countries need to be enforced. The crop diversification is a risk management strategy, as has been said, and I was happy that the issue of markets was highlighted because the small-scale farmers, if they are not linked to markets, then of course they will be autopic in their strategy. So creating infrastructure to link farmers to markets should take precedence if the smallholder farmers are to be linked to the international markets. The other issue related to that is, of course, the incentives of these farmers to produce the kinds of foods demanded in the international markets. And to go with that, to have standards which, to create awareness about the standards needed to access those international markets. So the Sierra Leone case, I think nothing strange has come out of it. And similarly with the Ethiopian case study, we find that there's so much, in the past there's been so much dependence on aid by Ethiopian government, but this is changing. The current situation is that with the intervention of the Ethiopian Transformation Agency, there is emphasis on local production, and food aid is being discouraged. And because of the creating opportunities for farmers to participate in the market, they are being given technology to produce on their own farms. They are being given, the infrastructure is developing to access the markets, and these kinds of interventions will limit the dependence on aid, and therefore dissuading farmers from producing the kinds of food they want to consume themselves. Otherwise, I think the papers are very interesting. They are complex in nature, and the issue of data is still outstanding. Thank you very much.